Also issues
both
of
sides.
families, that is a big thing as well. This I saw in Syria, where in the Golan Heights, it's completely divided. There's one side with Syria, and the other side is with Israel. And families have been separated, So how do you communicate with each other? I saw them taking loudspeakers, under the UN, protection. And that's how you start speaking on the loudspeaker, even, in your family affairs. That the marriage has taken place here, something happened, your child has gone to college. And then the other one from the opposite side, under Israel, will say something else and respond. And it's a very emotional kind of a, meeting that takes place.
We in this region, northeastern region, we have been through a lot of conflicts. We have seen those for almost 30 years now.
Yep.
I mean, although the character of this conflict is different, but the sufferings are, nonetheless, it's there.
Yep.
So I think my students and the other audience, they will be able to relate to this human sufferings. It will resonate among them.
I think so because Northeast has got its own experience of conflict and violence, and so you're already acquainted and sensitized to these kind of difficult social conditions. So I think you'll connect because of your own experience with people from elsewhere. Let's see, if I was speaking to people in Bangalore, would not be able to relate to it at all.
Yes.
And our idea is also the same. This is the idea. More often than not, we see these things as a military crisis or a crisis between two states, but we hardly see it as actually humanitarian crisis. And that's that's more important lens to look at the conflict rather than seeing it as a kind of a technical things involving two states or two sides of military. So that's precisely the idea of having this kind of a talk. Okay, people have got coming in. Jandana, admit kori jabo, ha?
No, Binod is doing it. Binod is doing it.
Moyu kori asu because this is now time, so people will pour in. So we will have to admit. So within 5 minutes, it will be full. So yes, people are coming.
It's already dark in Guwahati, isn't it?
Yeah, almost. And also cloudy, raining itself.
Oh, I see. Jayanta, which part of Assam are you from?
I am from a small town called Dhubri. It is near West Bengal border.
Yeah. You're having a big bridge being built over there.
Yeah.
The bridge.
Yeah, it's being planned.
Yep. Dhubri Phulbari, I think that's the...
Phulbari, yes. Dhubri Phulbari on Brahmaputra.
India's biggest.
But I am here in Guwahati for last almost 25 years now.
Oh, okay.
We have around 33 participants so far.
No, it's coming up.
Once VC joins, we can start.
No, it will go. No, it will go up to 100, more than 100 actually. Because our students are now started coming in. I can see the research scholars. No, VC is coming.
Yes.
Andy, hi.
Hi. How are you? Great to see you. Hi.
Same here.
Great.
Well,
Where are you now?
I'm in Delhi right now.
Okay, Delhi. Great. Okay.
Nice.
After so long, huh?
I know. I think last you used to make your visits to Moscow and keep coming to JNU.
Almost 30 years. Huh?
Yes.
Krishna would be joining probably.
Is it? Oh, good.
So I told him.
Where is he? He's in Shillong?
Sikkim.
Sikkim, okay.
Gangtok.
Okay, great.
So Sikkim Central University is in the Department of History.
Excellent.
So his son, I think I talked to him. So probably both of them will be joining.
I see.
Hmm.
So how old is his son? Is he in college?
He has already completed his PhD.
Oh my God. I was at Krishna's PhD.
He is mastered in English, MPhil, then PhD. His only results are awaited. He's almost 30 now.
Oh God.
Krishna is married for last 30 years.
Yes, I know.
So
right.
his son is not less than 28, 29.
Right. Good.
I remember during when we got married, his son was 3 years old.
I see. How many children do you have, Candy?
I have 2.
I see. Okay. How old are they?
Hey, talking to Atul. You joining? Okay. Fine. Krishna will be joining. I just talked to him.
Oh, very good.
He's just So you nowadays were in the West Asia or in China still?
I left China in last year. I came back to complete my assignment in January 2020.
Okay.
So these days I edit a website called indianarrative.com.
Okay.
So
still with the Hindu group? No.
Sorry?
Still with the Hindu group?
No, I left Hindu in
you left Hindu.
July last year. You muted, I think. Yeah. Right.
Should we start?
Okay.
Can we wait for 2 minutes, 2 more minutes?
Maybe.
Yeah, just 2 minutes. Yeah, just 2 minutes.
You are not in a hurry, na, Atul?
No, it's fine. Yeah. 7:15 is absolutely okay.
We have problem in electricity.
I believe it's also raining today in Guwahati.
Not everywhere. Some area probably. But it's almost raining mornings.
I see.
It almost rains, huh?
I know,
anytime it may rain.
Right.
So you have to be prepared with the alternate system, you know. Because no electricity means broadband doesn't work.
Oh, yes.
So I have to use a double. That's
Janata, start kore.
Yeah.
Okay, you start.
We can start now.
Mm-hmm.
So a very good evening to everyone. On behalf of the Bhupen Hazarika School of Mass Communication, I take this opportunity to welcome you all to this evening's special talk on Israel-Palestine conflict. We are proud to have amongst us Sri Atul Anejaji, an expert on conflict reporting for media. So before we listen to Sri Anejaji, I would like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Kandarpa Das, sir, and chairman of this evening's event, to initiate the dialogue. Sir, please.
Okay. So good evening. It's a very special day for me because I'm meeting my old friend after so many years, and meeting in a very unusual way in a virtual platform, and we'll be sharing a session where he will be speaking. Now, this day reminded me to our old days in the university days when we used to discuss politics, our feelings, also with Israel and Palestine. So Palestine for us is not something new. You know, we have been hearing and discussing since our JNU days in 1980s. And it's very special that today again, after so many years, we'll be discussing one topic which we used to talk in our canteens, dhabas in JNU campus. And today, the discussion topic has been beautifully Christian, like Israel-Palestine conflicts, snippets from the field. So I believe we are not trying to pose a topic, something called like aggression by Israel, or maybe the self-determination struggle by Hamas or Palestine people, the self-determination and right of Palestinian people. So those are the issues, definitely the real, but the tone of the today's discussion, I think it's a totally different aspects. We are talking about the snippets from the field. That itself says that we are actually going to experience those snippets from the West Asian, from the between in Israel and Palestinian field. And we have amongst us a person, you know, who has been reporting from West Asia for last so many years. I have read him in Frontline, in Hindu. His reportings from Beijing. He's reporting from Gaza. So I think we'll definitely feel something, you know, in a very reporting from the ground, something like that. Yeah. So I think that our research scholars, students, faculty members are eagerly waiting to listen to somebody who has experienced those at the ground level. We do not want to theorize something. We do not want to make so many political discourse, but we basically want to hear actually somebody from the field. And here, the most important thing is that in a war, as it is said, nobody wins a war. It's basically ultimately the people who loses in the war. So the people, whether it is Israeli people, whether it is Palestinian people, they suffer at the field. They become the victims of the snipers. And that is why I think it's very important to discuss about the snipers in the field. So I believe Atul has a long experience. He knows the area very well. He understands the conflict situation. He has been reporting in various conflict areas. So I think will be greatly benefited, our research scholars, students, and the faculty members. And I normally also looking forward to listen to him. And since it's an online platform, if you speak for a very long time, that's also when you start a discussion, and when the chairman starts a discussion with long comments, it's become very boring. I don't want to do that. And moreover, I don't want to stand between the Snippets and Atul. Okay, let him start. So let's listen to him. So I think before he starts speaking, I'll request our director from the School of Social Sciences, Joydeep Borua, to introduce Atul Aneja to our listeners. Joydeep, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Kontrapur Das, sir. Professor Jayanta Kumar Sharma, Director, Bhupen Hazarika School of Mass Communication, esteemed colleagues, friends, and also other participants who have joined this virtual platform today. I have been given the task of introducing our speaker this evening. So let me admit that the idea of holding a talk on Israel-Palestine conflict came to our mind when the conflict really escalated during the first half of June, early part of June. And I discussed this with Professor Jayanta Kumar Sharma about the possibility of having such a talk at the earliest of our convenience. We were discussing that probably it is not only important to look at this conflict as between two countries or between two states, between two military forces, but it is more important to look at this crisis as a humanitarian crisis. It's a crisis of people. And to do that, we were looking for speakers. And then immediate name came to my mind was Otulda's name. I fondly call him Otulda because I know him for quite some time, and who comes directly from that theater where the present crisis is actually unfolding. So it is an honor and privilege for me to introduce Atul Aneja, who is a very senior, well-known journalist and commentator, who specializes in geopolitics and international security with a special focus on China, Eurasia, and West Asia. He received his MPhil in International Relations from School of West Asian and African Studies, JNU, New Delhi. And he has a very long, vast, and very deep experience of reporting the different kind of, the conflict that is going on around the globe. He was a former strategic affairs editor of the Hindu newspaper very recently, last year. And he was also the associate editor for Hindu posted in China during 2014 to 2020. He was West Asia correspondent for Hindu based in Bahrain and Dubai from 2002 to 2014. He extensively reported the Arab Spring from Cairo, Benghazi, and Tunis, specializing in conflict zones in 2003 and 2004. He has been a frequent visitor to Iran on several journalistic assignments since 1996. He also covered Kargil War from Kashmir, the situation in Afghanistan as it appeared from Dushanbe and Kabul soon after 9/11 attacks. He has traveled extensively in all Central Asian republics on various journalistic assignments, and also he uh, he writes for a lot of media houses. I mean, not only primarily, of course, Hindu, but other media houses like Jerusalem Post, from Kenya, the Star, the Hans Made India, India West, Money Life, and all other such places. Currently, he edits the IndiaNarrative.com, a news portal, and he is also associated with Asian Vision Institute in Cambodia as an advisor. So we are very, very privileged, and we are very honored to have him today to speak to us on this very special talk. And I welcome him from on behalf of the university and also my personal behalf. And it's great to have you, Otulda. And then let's move and to hear from Otulda itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jaydeep, for your kind words. And Candy, it's been just fantastic seeing you, though virtually. But a lot of fond memories are triggered just by the visual. And I wish we had time to go into that. But today we are looking at a very alarming situation which is developing in West Asia, especially because of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. I would briefly like to go into the historical aspects just to contextualize the present, and then talk more about certain personal experiences which were there on the way. And I also in mind people who or journalists of the future as to how to operate in a field environment where in a conflict zone. So I mean, so I'll just begin by saying the context in which this Israel conflict, Palestinian conflict has emerged. Essentially, one has to go to something called the Zionist movement, which starts even before the First World War, and which is essentially gathering Jews all over the world and having a nation state for them. So 1917 is a very important year for this because it is the British colonialists and a person called Alfred Balfour and his famous Balfour Declaration of 1917, which actually gives the mandate and a sanction to establish a state of Israel. Now, the problem which arises is that the area which is earmarked as the state of Israel is already occupied by the indigenous Palestinian people. And so there is an inherent tension in the Balfour Declaration itself. All this gets accelerated with the Holocaust, which takes place in the Second World War, where there's a worldwide empathy for the Jews because of the extermination in the concentration camps carried out by Hitler. And therefore, the Zionist movement gets its second wind and gets its energy from there. And that is where we come from 1945 onwards, the practical steps are taken for the establishment of the state of Israel. In 1948, Israel emerges as a nation state. And right from the time of its birth, you have the conflict started because the Palestinian people, the indigenous people revolt. And because they are Arabs and share the commonality of collective hurt of the Arabs, you have the Arab leaders joining them. And so the countries, Arab countries around, come to the Palestinians' aid. Chiefly, it is Egypt, which is bordering Sinai area, and it's a desert sort of a zone south of Gaza. And then you are into the Sinai desert, and thereafter further down towards Cairo. So it is the Egyptian armies which come in, and then you have the Jordanians coming from the north. So that is another border which is there with current-day Israel. So you have this multi-pronged Arab attacks coming in, and that is where the Arabs lose at war because essentially it's technology which is there with the Jewish people, and the empathy, because of the empathy generated all over the West, they also have very strong connections with Britain and other developed parts of the world at that time. So immediately after the birth of Israel and the war of 1948, you have this enormous displacement of Palestinian people and the loss of land. And from a person who has a place to stay, the Palestinians gradually are being turned into refugees. And where do they go from there? Obviously, as in any kind of conflict situation, you go into the neighboring areas. And the neighboring areas is Sinai on one side, Lebanon is on another side, north of the Litani River, and of course, Jordan, which is next door. And you have Syria. So you have this flood of refugees going out from there, and that is the beginning of this long-drawn conflict. Of course, the Arabs by this time are also in a high, and Arab nationalism is going on very strongly. And you have leaders like Gamal Abdel Nasser, who is the face of the Arab resistance to Israel. And you have a series of wars which are fought thereafter. And 1956 is one. And then you have, which again, the Arabs do not win, but you have 73 war is a very important one, because that's where the former Soviet Union comes into the assistance of the Arabs, and who acquire modern aircraft, weaponry. The MiG start flying from Moscow to Cairo. And the Israelis almost lose that war, which is called the Yom Kippur War, because of the surprise element. Yom Kippur is a festival of the Jews. and everyone was in celebratory moves when the attack came from the Arab side. But yet, the Israelis prevail in the end, thanks to the American connection, which has developed very strongly between Israel and the diaspora is there also in the United States, which is extremely what we call the Jewish lobby now. So it was powerful even at that time, which continued to grow in strength in the United States. So you had this big support coming from the US to Israel. That connection had developed. And 73 therefore becomes a benchmark. But that is also a process when you start looking at a solution, because 73 war really showed the Israelis that you have a small territory and you are vulnerable. So the sentiment for coming to some kind of a peace agreement with the Arabs also starts there. So externally what happens is that in the end, the Sinai area, which was captured by the Israelis, is given back to the Egyptians. And in return, you have a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel coming after the 1973 war. And that is one flank Israel secures, which will be conflict-free in the future, which is the Egyptian side. There is also another war which took place on another front, which is on the Syrian front, which is called the Golan Heights. Now, I have seen Golan Heights is completely divided. You have a place called Quneitra coming from the Syrian side, and the other side, you see this farmland, which is under the Israeli occupation. That has still not been sorted out. And it is quite heart-rending to see how families have been displaced in Sinai. I personally witnessed it about 2005 or 6, I'm not sure of the year. When you have families coming, they have a designated day to talk to each other. So suppose the uncle is on the other side and you have a nephew on this side, and they talk once a week on loudspeakers. So you then narrate your stories about what's happening to your family. Then you start discussing about somebody's marriage, somebody's got educated, gone abroad. So that conversation takes place from loudspeakers on either side of the divided territory of Golan Heights. So that area still remains to be resolved. And then you also have the Jordanian side, because the Jordanian, if you go to Amman today, it's the capital of Jordan, you are struck by the number of Palestinians you find. In fact, 40% of Jordanian population today is Palestinian because of these refugees which had to leave Israel. And then Jordan is just about an hour and a half away. So to give you, and there are refugee camps there. You have the Wahadat refugee camp, which I went there, and it's on top of a hill. So Palestinian people all around. Bazaars are inside that particular camp. So it's not like a designated tented city or something. It sort of merges with the city. So you are just traveling along. In fact, my problem was I needed a photograph, to put on a passport or something. I needed a picture. So I took this Palestinian driver who was a Jordanian. I said, I need a photograph. So he just drove and we came up to the top of the hill. So I asked him, where are we? He said, we are in the Palestinian refugee camp. And the studio was inside this camp. And that's where I got my picture taken. So, it's like normal markets are functioning, a lot of people around. But this is the way that people somewhere down the line have also got assimilated into the mainstream of Jordan. So it's also going to be hard for people to leave these camps and go back once you have a two-state solution, that is Israel and Palestine, two states living side by side, which has been the later formulation of resolving this conflict. It's interesting that, I'll just give you a sort of a feel of how it is to travel from Amman to, let's say, Jerusalem. You take a car for the border and you pass through bone dry areas, the hillocks around, and the road is passing through that, not a blade of grass on that. And as you're going down, you see these signboards, Dead Sea, 20 kilometers away. You read all that in history books and suddenly you see that, you're going downhill. And then it says Dead Sea, some meters below sea level. This is the only place on earth, I'm told, which is below the sea level. So you're really going down towards that. And on your left, when you see the signboard, is Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo is the place where Abraham delivered his 10 commandments. And you can see that site there. And as you go down, you're in the Dead Sea area. And it's like a lake. And we all know it's extremely salty and full of minerals. So you can float on the Dead Sea. And there is a Jordanian side of the Dead Sea and there's an Israeli side of the Dead Sea. And that's where they have the border point, the crossing from Jordan to Israel. So if you have an Indian passport, then life is relatively easy because of India's relations with Israel. Alirpa will remember that how we had once protested when Rajiv Gandhi recognized, Israel. And it was near the DLTA stadium in Delhi that we got thrashed by the police for protesting. But so but I really saw that, the border post. So if you have an Indian passport, you cross that, get your passport stamped. On the other side, you take then a taxi to Jerusalem, not very far. And as you start going, now you're inside Israeli territory. It's like a valley and there's farmland. And then there are these hills on either side. And on top of those hills are these settler colonies. These are these Israeli settlers who have occupied this area, which is a disputed area. You're not supposed to be there, but you have this white houses with the red topped roofs on either side and through which you pass. And it takes you around about half an hour to 45 minutes to reach Jerusalem. And that is one amazing city because it's got layers and layers of history. It is the area of 3 Abrahamic religions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all coming together with icons related to their particular religions, deeply into Jerusalem. And you have this area called the Temple Mount, which the Jews call, and next to that is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where Prophet Muhammad is supposed to have ascended to heaven. And that's the historical importance to that mosque. And there is an old ancient Jewish temple, all in an area of, about 400 to 500 meters maximum. And that's really the fount, in a way, of such deep historical importance and also of conflict. And this is what is called the East Jerusalem part. Now, East Jerusalem, if you have a 2-state solution, then East Jerusalem goes to Palestine. And of course, the Israelis protest that very fundamentally because they say that is linked to the very sense of identity of the Jewish people. So you can understand the depth of feelings and the depth of emotion when you are visiting the Temple Mount area, and how difficult it would be to come to a compromise on something as fundamental as your basic historical identity. So this is a little bit feel of Jerusalem. And if you drive from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, now it's almost 2 words apart. By the way, I also took a train once from Jerusalem and to Tel Aviv. It's a very slow train which goes through these mountains again, low-rise kind of hills, let me put it that way. And it's about an hour by train to reach Tel Aviv. And Tel Aviv is something which gives you a completely different feel. It's like a modern city, although it's an ancient port. Jaffa was the ancient port for this area, which is Tel Aviv, and you have the sea on one side, which the Mediterranean opens out. So, but Tel Aviv gives you a modern feel, something like a Bombay. Let me put it that. It's the commercial capital of Israel. And you have a place there called Ramat Gan. And Ramat Gan I visited because there is a strong a Gujarati business community in Ramat Gan. So obviously, this is way back, I think around 2000 or so when I visited Ramat Gan. And once you enter, it's like Zaveri Bazaar of Bombay, where you have these Bansalis and all these Gujaratis all clustered together. But they are some of the richest people, not just of Israel, but of the region. And I spoke to one gentleman, one Mr. Bansali, and he explained to me that how they are connected with Antwerp in Belgium, and Surat. So, the connection is like this. The raw diamond is taken out from Sierra Leone or Liberia, that area in Africa. It's, if you've seen the film Blood Diamond, this is the area. So that's where the raw conflict diamonds are taken out. And from there, they reach Antwerp in Belgium. The small diamonds go either to Moscow or to Surat, where they're polished. So the taking out of the diamonds is not controlled by the Gujaratis. That the Lebanese do. And how the Lebanese reached there, that I don't know, though I visited that particular area in Sierra Leone once. But it is the Lebanese who take out the diamonds, and this is a Lebanon-Gujarat connection. And finally, it ends up with Ramat Gan in Israel. It's a fascinating story, and also about how the Gujarati community has actually remained united with its connections with Uganda, Africa, Gujarat. No intermarriages with other communities, so that it has got its own rules and laws. And I understood that not by staying in India, but by visiting them in Ramat Gan in Israel. Coming back to the conflict, you see, what happens now is that once the refugees go on the other side, there's a demand to come back, and the conflicts begin with each of these countries. So now the support base for the refugees changes over time. After Nasser disappears, I think 1976, if I'm not mistaken. He dies in 76, and after that a new game begins. And you have, of course, Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat, Palestinian leader, socialist-oriented, very modern, European in outlook. So you have the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is operating outside the Palestinian territories, and their base is really Tunis, in North Africa, which is Tunisia. And of course, while the PLO remains strong, there is also the 79 revolution, which is taking place in Iran. And once Egypt signs a peace deal with the Israelis, there is a vacuum in terms of who supports the Palestinian people. And that is where Iran is coming up, the Shiite Iran, and starts building its Shia network of Palestinian resistance. It does so with a group called Hezbollah, which is again Shia fighters based in Lebanon. And Hezbollah then establishes its contacts with the Hamas, which comes as actually a rival to the PLO. Now, this is interesting because what happens is that once the Israelis realize that the PLO is becoming strong, the time has come to divide the Palestinian movement. So the rise of Hamas is actually an Israeli intelligence operation, which is really a Mossad operation, where they try and co-opt Sheikh Yassin and company, the leaders of the Hamas, as a rival to Arafat to break up the Palestinian movement. But you see, this is what happens when you ride a monster. It's not necessary that you control it forever. The Hamas gets in touch with the Israelis, benefits from the political space that is being yielded, but then becomes an entity of its own and establish contacts with Israel. So at some point, the Israelis lose control over the Hamas, but its origin lies as an intelligence operation by the Mossad, which actually doesn't work. So you have these two Palestinian groups, the divisions which are taking place, one mostly being run by the Iranians, Syrians, and the Hezbollah. And you have the PLO by Arafat, which is the face, which is UN recognized, and which then there's a time arises in the mid-90s when you have this sentiment called land for peace formulation, that having solved most of the problems with the neighboring Arab countries, the time has arrived for an internal resolution between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That's the moment when you have a leader like Yitzhak Rabin from Israel, who is heading the peace movement. In Israel, you have the Peace Now movement, for example, which was totally for reconciliation with the Palestinians. And so it's, you got to see the shades of gray. There are organizations within Israel which talk the Palestinian language as well. I mean, in the sense, political language. So you have Rabin coming in and signing a deal with Arafat. And we were in the university when we saw these famous photographs of the handshake between Rabin and Arafat, with I think Carter probably standing behind, or was it Clinton by that time? Forgetting 90. So it has to be Clinton by that time. So what happens now is that the Israeli right is totally opposed to this two-state solution. And that is where a right-wing Jew assassinates Rabin to set back the two-state solution. And that is really the setback which is so durable. And after Rabin is assassinated and dies, and you have people like Ariel Sharon, the rise of the right in Israel. Because in Israel, you have two kinds. One is the Labour Party, which is essentially socialist oriented. It is made of people who are called Ashkenazis, which are people who have migrated from Europe, basically, and carry some of the liberal thinking of Europe into Israel. So you have the Labour here, and Labour is more centrist than it is right. But by the time Yitzhak Rabin is assassinated, that's a time when the right is on the rise, and you have people like Sharon and Netanyahu, which come up on this side. And because there is a right-wing shift here, you also see a gradual decline of Yasser Arafat, who eventually, I believe, was poisoned and eliminated by Netanyahu and company. He dies in a Paris hospital. And then you have this binary between the Hamas on one side and Islamic Jihad, and you have Netanyahu and co on this side. And there is complete polarization, and we are back from that situation when you had this land for peace and two-state solution coming up. I remember visiting in the around 2000 when Vajpayee was a prime minister, and it was Jaswant Singh's visit to Israel and Palestine. And I remember very clearly that we drove from the Israeli territory. You have to cross this place called Hebron. There's a checkpoint there, and you cross then into Gaza. And there's a cemetery there as soon as you cross, which has a lot of Indian soldiers killed in First World War. That cemetery is there in Gaza. But it was like a seamlessly one was going from one territory to another, almost. And you have the Church of Nativity also very close by next to Hebron, which is supposed to be the birthplace of Christ. And it's all a wooden structure, and it really grows on you, and you see the sense of history when you visit Church of Nativity. And then when we entered Gaza, you could see around 2000 a lot of construction activity, because everyone was anticipating another state emerging, which is the state of Palestine. And a boom was supposed to be coming over there. And there were also geological surveys being conducted to see if you can get oil and gas in that area. And of course, that was a port and exit for trade with the rest of the world. So that was Gaza at that time, which was really on its way up. And India had donated one in the University of Gaza. We had donated a Jawaharlal Nehru Library, for which Jaswant Singh went and inaugurated. So it was a very different kind of an era, around that time, where you were looking at peace rather than conflict. But I remember we were sitting for lunch in a restaurant. There were these Palestinians around. They said, "This is lull before the storm. We are not going to accept this kind of two-state solution." So you see the radical elements on either side now. The Palestinians saying that why should we just have this two-state solution? The entire Israel is ours. And why should we compromise? And then you have the right wing coming up from their side, from the Israeli side. So there's a kind of a new situation which arises, the rise of the Hamas and the support which comes from Iran via Hezbollah. I remember the Hamas leadership was in Syria at that time, in Damascus. It was much later that I visited Damascus, and I wanted to interview the Hamas people. So I stayed in a hotel, and I went to the information ministry in Damascus, requesting them, because Bashar al-Assad, the present president, had given the Hamas shelter in Damascus. So I went to this lady who was in charge. I said, I want to interview. I am a journalist from India. And she was, one of the old Arab socialists, chain smoking, completely westernized, no question of any hijab, forget all that. And she said, okay, we will see that what we can do, but it will take time. She discouraged me from staying there, but I said, no, I have to. Then I went to the Indian embassy. I requested there. I said, you have contacts with the information ministry because I have to interview. It took me about full 10 days, after which I got this phone call that, okay, you can go and we will arrange for it. And it was one hell of a journey because I was told that you come out of your hotel and you take a taxi, and that taxi will take you to a petrol station. Now you get down from that petrol station and another car will pick you up, and that will take you close to a mosque. And from there, you have to wait outside a mosque and you will be picked up by Hamas people to their headquarters. There was a Syrian lady who was a part of our embassy. It was a strange circumstances that I took the first taxi, went to the petrol station, and suddenly I see this lady coming in her, she had a Maruti Alto, because I remembered very clearly, we had a conversation on that. She said, look, I thought you were not safe, you come with me. I said, okay. So she took me to that mosque and she said, okay, I'll be waiting till the time you're picked up, just in case that you are safe. And sure enough, after about 10 minutes, it was like a SUV, which came with tinted glasses, your black, not the windscreen, but the windows were all blackened. And they opened the door, called my name. And so I was inside this vehicle. And we drove for about 15 minutes. So the mountainside again, on the outskirts of Damascus. So you're climbing up the mountains. And after a while, they said, okay, now you can get down. And I got down, and this was a sheer face, like a cliff on that side. So I was just wondering, where is the Hamas here? Then finally, there was one person who came, he escorted me. And it was like a cave, but once it got opened, it was like a 5-star restaurant. Great furniture, computers, and I was asked, what kind of coffee would you like? Would you like Turkish coffee? Would you like cappuccino? I said, this is just amazing. This was the Hamas headquarters. So, of course, they took my cell phone. And they said the number 2 of Hamas, Marzouk, is gone to meet Bashar al-Assad. So he'll be coming and then you can interview. So we waited for about half an hour. And then they had the closed circuit TV. I could see him, Marzouk, coming from climbing the stairs. And soon after that, we started just doing some small talk before we got into the interview. So I said, okay, you are from India. Indian people like tea. You like tea with milk? I said, yeah, very much. I've been missing that for a long time being in Damascus. And so that's how it went on. And after the interview was over, now there's no, on the way back, there was nothing. None of those cars came. So I was out in the open and just walking down, and I hadn't told my wife exactly where I was going, but I'm close to my brother-in-law, so I was keeping him informed where exactly I was, and realized that these guys had taken the cell phone away and I hadn't taken it back on the way back. So now I wanted to retrace my step and get my phone back, and I couldn't really find that building, but they were nice enough. So one of them had come out with the phone, and that's how. So this was one kind of an adventure which I had in the field while doing this conflict zones. It's a different matter that actually the Hamas ditches Bashar al-Assad, and the entire leadership goes to Qatar, and then joins Muslim Brotherhood people and some of these ultra, these terror groups, which ultimately attacked Bashar in the Syrian war after 2011. But that's another story, how it happened. So this is essentially, I would also like to briefly touch upon the 2006 experience which I had, because as I said, there were various countries which these refugees had sort of spread, and one was Lebanon. And Lebanon, this is 2006, when the Israelis attacked the Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is the one which is supporting Hamas. So they were going to the route, and the route was Hezbollah, and their headquarters was southern Beirut. So it's interesting. It's an amazing city, because in Beirut you have one side the mountains, so you can have skiing on one side, and you come down, and then you have the sea as well, and so you could. It just gives you the entire feel. Within about 40 minutes, you can be in the mountains and you can be in the sea at the same time. I mean, it's just amazing, beautiful city, one of the best Arab cities I've seen. Very French in architecture, because they were just colonized by France at one time. And deep history, because you have these Roman columns there. So, it was part of the Byzantine Empire as well. So you have these remnants, layers and layers of history in Beirut. But what had happened was, so central Beirut is essentially Maronite Christians. And then you have the diplomatic area. And finally, you have the southern Beirut, which is the headquarters of the Hezbollah, and the leader being Hassan Nasrallah. So when the war had started, they were attacking southern Beirut, which means there were airstrikes which were going on. So I was in a hotel in central Beirut. So I knew, so long as this pattern remains, that is, the Israelis attacked southern Beirut. Southern Beirut, they were attacking Haifa in Israel. So the rules of the game one could understand in the field, that while a war is going on, there are safe zones within a war. And you need not be, as a journalist, be too adventurous. Especially, I was a print journalist, so I didn't have to take a camera along, or, video people or television people have a much more difficult time, because they're far more visible than somebody from print. And I made the point that I never went with this, Reporters Without Borders who give you these flag jackets and all that, because I think you become you become so identified. It's very difficult for your movement in a conflict zone to get so identified with these things. But it just happened that one day the attacks from southern Beirut went to Tel Aviv. So that was my red line, that the rules of engagement are changing. And if the Hezbollah has hit Tel Aviv today, next day or very soon the Israelis will hit central Beirut. So the time to get out was now. So I called the driver who had got me from Damascus. This was in 2006, who drove me from Damascus to Beirut is about 3 hours drive. So I called him, I said, 5 o'clock in the morning, we got to leave. And we'll go to the Syrian border and you drop me up to Damascus. But it was too late, because 5 o'clock we left, the bombing of central Beirut had started. And we were driving, and there was this bridge. And I could see that bomb on that bridge, still in the line of sight. To be very honest, though I was very scared, I was reminded of the movie Sholay at that time. You see that scene of Amitabh Bachchan, finally there's a bomb on that bridge and he shoots that thing and it blows up. It was something like that. You could see that bomb there. And this driver panicked. He said, look, I'm going back. My family's here. I said, you can't leave me here. So do you know a route which will take me to the Syrian border? And I'll leave you at the Syrian border. You come back from the Syrian border. Don't take me to Damascus. So then we drove up the mountain. And, it was a circuitous route. And we came to a place called Tripoli. Tripoli is Libya capital as well, but there's a Tripoli in Lebanon. And Tripoli is right at the border with Homs in Syria. So this driver drops me there. I said, look, I'll get my passport, my visa, entry visa here for Syria. But you have to put me somewhere. How do I go to Damascus from here? So he said, okay, that's fine. So there was a taxi there and he talked to them, and it's a Syrian family. And he said, okay, you travel with them. So then I got into this taxi. This is a Syrian, very nice, lovely people. And they drove me up to Damascus. We crossed Homs. But you like every other place, you stop for a place to eat. So there was something like at Hawa, or you can say that, somewhere there. And I wanted to pay, because as it is, they were not allowing me to pay for the taxi. But they would just not take any money from me. And so finally, after about 3-4 hours, we reached Damascus, brought me, and their son was in the military or something. So they were going to visit him. So these are the kind of things as a journalist in a conflict zone, you experience, and it makes it, sometimes you are scared like hell, but I think in the end it's very rewarding, because you finally realize that people are people, and there are good people and there are bad people, and it really doesn't matter what nationality you are. When you are in situations like this, your humanity comes out, and yeah, you connect very strongly. I think I've spoken for a long time, and I will stop here. And if we can take some Q&A, and I deliberately didn't make this a very structured kind of a lecture kind of a thing, but basically as it goes, it's snippets from the ground, snippets from the field. I've shared some of my experience and tried to weave in some part of history into it. There are many strings which are not tied up, so we can take them up in Q&A. If any people have questions to ask, I'd be very happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Atul. In fact, it was a very mesmerizing kind of a journey. You took us from Palestinian to Jerusalem. From Jerusalem, on the way we see the Dead Sea, then we see our Gujarati people, and finally to the Hamas headquarters in Damascus. And it was a very mesmerizing kind of a story, journey. I remember the story, by one of our fellow journalists in Assam, when he decided to visit Forest Burwa, and he traveled all the way. It was, I was finding similarities. What could happen. How you travel, what actually you could feel in that battlefield. And it's also interesting to find out when you said that the same Wasir who has actually sheltered the Hamas people and finally joined fanatics and attacked Syria.
Yep.
And then the most important thing is that as a journalist, what you felt in a different land altogether when you met Gujarati, when you met Syrian people, when you met Palestinian, when you met Israelis, but ultimately the people everywhere. And ultimately, they refuse to take money from you. They give you a free ride. So all kinds of things. I think after all, it matters. So after all, when I said in a war, nobody loses. Ultimately, the people who suffer. So that is a very wonderful kind of approach you took in your speech. I'll not speak much. Definitely, there are so many questions. I would request Joyanta Sharma to moderate the question answer session.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Aneja ji. We have a few questions. Most of the questions are actually, people are now worried about Israel using artificial intelligence. There are questions on that, and there are questions on about, most people are curious about how to resolve this crisis or conflict. The first question I'd like you to field is that, sir, from Pinku Kalita of Tiop, Jorhat. The question is, it says that if the conflict is not resolved, will it lead to the World War III? And will the new president of Israel, will the new president seek a peaceful solution? This is from Pinku Kalita of Tiop, Jorhat.
Yeah. See, before I answer that question, I just want to respond to Candy's observation. You see, what happened, I realized India's soft power was so strong in these areas, coming from, your Nehruvian and Indira Gandhi's time onwards. Small examples. I got out of the airport in Jordan, in Amman. And there was one taxi which came, and there was a Jordanian next to me. So it was not clear who would go in first. So this guy looks at me. He says, "Are you from India?" I said, "Yeah." "No, you are our guest. You have to go into the taxi first." So it's small courtesies like this, because there is a great image of India. I don't know, and it's changing though, but I'm talking when I visited there, I felt it there. Again, I was in a place called Aqaba, which is on the Israel border. You have the city of Eilat on one side and you have Aqaba on this side. I'd gone there for a journalistic assignment. And I had to come back and my ticket had to be changed. That is, the dates had changed. So my Royal Jordanian Airlines ticket had to change. So I was walking at a street. I was looking for the airline office. And I saw these 4 or 5 people, standing in a group in one corner. So I introduced myself. I said, can you tell me where is the Royal Jordanian Airlines office? And one of the guys steps out and says that, are you from India? I said, yeah. He said, I'll take you there, but the reason why I'll do so. I said, yeah, please tell me. He said, look, under the ITech program, I studied in Pune. And this is Aqaba, deep Aqaba. We had shoestring budget at that time. It is not, we have much more money now. We're much richer. But we had educated this gentleman in Pune University on a scholarship. So he walked all the way with me to the Royal Jordanian office, talking about his wonderful days in Pune. So that soft power I could feel very strongly in the Arab world. That remains, whether you go to Syria, whether you go to Jordan, this is very, very strong. I just wanted to flag that this is something we need to preserve. The image of India, of a non-aligned India, Nehru being friends of Nasser, that is very, very strong. It continues to remain so in this area. Coming back to Mr. Kalita's question regarding about the prospects of peace in Israel-Palestine. You see, at this time, we are in a cusp. The old ways not working anymore. Netanyahu is out, and you have a new generation of Israelis who think differently. I mean, I remember this was somewhere in 2011 when the Arab Spring was going on. You had this young people of Israel protesting against their own government and wanting more liberties. And, it's a new generation with a new sentiment. And it's polarized. But this is also becoming strong in Israel now, that they need a peace with the Palestinian people. But they are also victims of history because the polarization remains. And for reasons which can be understood, the Hamas has become more radicalized because the softer approach, the more negotiation, that dialogue-based approach was not working. So you have this kind of a changing situation now where there are strands of a new beginning toward sentiment towards peace, but yet the sentiment for conflict also remains strong. So it can go either way now. But at least one can say that there has been a change with Netanyahu being defeated and a new composite government coming here. It's very interesting that in Israel, you have the Arab parties being the kingmakers. And I remember the casting vote thing. Arab parties are the ones who are the swing players. I mean, they were the ones who formed a new government. Just a couple of votes and it swung the other way. So you have this situation which is coming up. So, but it's still very, very uncertain in early days. We will see if there is a greater sentiment for the two-state solution, because that's the only way forward.
Right.
So let us see if that's go. But we are at a cusp. But there has been a breaking of ground in the last 1 month or so, which is pointing to a direction which can go to the positive direction, but not necessarily so.
Thank you, sir. There is one question. It is related to this artificial intelligence technology used by Israel recently. It is from Loken Banik. He asked how Iran nuclear deal will affect Israel.
Yep.
And he says that we noticed Israel declared first artificial intelligence based war in the last conflict. So is that situation intentionally created so that Israel can showcase their new technology?
And in one way, technologically, the Israelis have been way advanced than others. And the use of what you call standoff weapons, where you're not visible, but you fire from a distance. They have made great strides into that. And also the use of drones has been there. You had the UAVs, the Israelis were pioneers into that. So that's something which is going on for some time. But I think the interesting part is the nuclear deal revival. I was talking to Iranians in a webinar few days ago, and they are of the view that it's just a matter of time before you have the new nuclear deal coming in. Even though there is a change in government in Iran, but the real power is with the supreme leader, which is Ayatollah Khamenei. So it really doesn't change much if you have the new president. So the nuclear deal is most probably going to come up. And the Israelis know it. Once you have the nuclear deal coming in, sanctions against Iran gets removed. And Iran is a country with enormous human talent and huge resources, oil and gas, and also great history of being Persians and very cautious that they are a civilizational state. It's a very deep country. It's a pivotal state in the region. So I think the accommodation of Iran is going to take place, and that is going, whatever be the case, whatever government comes in Israel will not be able to ignore this fact. So that is where my worry really is, that we could be moving closer to a greater friction between Iran and Israel in the coming days. And the Israelis have already come geographically closer to the Iranians by normalizing their relations with the United Arab Emirates, for Sudan, Bahrain. So the Gulf countries which are sort of bordering Iran. When I was in Dubai, my daughter, we used to stand in a balcony. We were in an apartment, and there was a sea in front. So she would ask me that what is there on the other side. I said, this is like a pond. You cross it and you will be in Bandar Abbas. So that's how close UAE is to Iran. And if you have an embassy, which is an Israeli embassy opened in Abu Dhabi, the Mossad is already in. Take it for granted. It's already there. And from the Israeli perspective, they would try and create that as a bridgehead so that the geographical distance for a conflict is reduced. So I think it's a worrying situation between Iran after they are accommodated in the nuclear deal, because the Israelis, because they're a very small country, the sense of vulnerability is so strong, there is no strategic depth. So either you go on the offensive or you're destroyed. And the Iranians have developed long-range missiles as well, some of which were transferred to the Hezbollah in Lebanon. So when I was talking about the firing from South Lebanon to Israel, to Haifa, and then to Tel Aviv, and frankly, getting translated to Hamas, is essentially, it's the Iranian missile development, which is getting translated to a range of weapons. So that's where the situation is going to be. Being very security conscious, whether Americans are with them or not, the Israelis can take proactive action. So I think this is really the time for some back channel talks to begin between the Iranians and the Israelis. And that will eventually be the game changer. Once they come to some tacit agreement, of course, being democracies, you have to sell it in a way that you have not succumbed to the other party. So how you package your messaging for your domestic audience is always difficult, because both want to appear strong. But it's time that they had this. Otherwise, both these countries being strong countries, oil and gas flowing through the Persian Gulf, it can be a huge global issue. Suddenly, it will just surge and impact most economies, because if you have the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, that is from where your oil is coming from the Gulf countries before it gets into the Indian Ocean, and those are sea lanes we are taking oil to India and then further out to China, Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan. It's all going from this side. So this is really the worrying side. That we are, maybe because at one level tensions are easing with the JCPOA or the nuclear deal coming through, but this track will get activated, and I don't see anyone addressing this either in the United Nations Security Council or elsewhere. So this is a big worry, not only for the two, but also for us in India.
So there are several audience who are actually asking this question, you have already touched this. They are asking about the role of countries like India, the United Nations, America, and other major countries, Iran, in solving this crisis. Questions have come from Jahnavi Devi. Then question has come from Ajoy Chinte, North Lakhimpur College, from Abhijit Bhuya of KK Hendrik State Open University, Shruti Bharali. All of them are actually basically asking one question: this two-nation theory, what will be the role of the United Nations and America, as well as the role of countries like India in finding a solution to this?
See, unfortunately, Jayanta, in India has, switched off from playing a regional or a global role. I think it happens after the economic reform started in 90s, but got accelerated. That we will, retreat from the Nehruvian area, whereas as the leader of the non-aligned movement, we were actually intervening, let's say 50 to 53, the Korean War. Ultimately, the ceasefire agreement, we played a major role in that. I think we have a deep interest in being part of the solution. Because as I said, if there's a conflict between Israel and Iran, then we get hit badly. Because of our energy security gets hit very bad. Not only do we buy oil from Iran, though reduced, we buy oil from Kuwait, from UAE, and most importantly from Saudi Arabia. And your Reliance refinery, let's say in Jamnagar, will get so badly hit straight away if there's any obstruction coming in that. So we have an interest. I think we have a genuine interest. It's not out of idealistic reasons I'm saying so. I think there's a very practical reasons of economy that we should be try and do something and intervene. But unfortunately, I see that we have just retreated into our shell these days. Though we are now currently, part of the Security Council, 15-member Security Council, not the 5 permanent. So we are part of that. And I think we need to raise our voice. Countries like India, who, in fact, look at this. India wants to be a member of the UN Security Council, which means what you are saying in the world is that we are ready for global responsibilities. That from just national, we are going international now. But if you are aspiring to be a member of the Security Council, then you better take international responsibilities as well, which is going to affect all of us, including India. So there is there's a tradition, and there is also a scope for a role in the UN Security Council, because we are, at least for some time, we are part of the 15 members. So yes, there is a role both for the Security Council and for the India, but I think there is a need for a change in mindset, or to get out of this, pre-globalized kind of thing that is sovereignty and national interest alone which matters, and rest of the world, because it is all interconnected and interdependent. We guard our national interest by engaging with the rest of the world. We are not an island, and we have, with countries like Iran, we not only have the economic side, but there is a deep historical relationship between ancient Persia and India, and linguistically we have so much in common. And I'll give you an example. I was in Iran, or I think 2009, 2010, somewhere there, and it was in a hotel. So I got into a lift, and I wanted to go to the 5th floor. So I pressed 5th, and there was a recorded voice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I said, wow, this is our language. Our counting has come from Persia. So, it's a simple thing like that, which tells you how deep is the historical connect. So there are layers which we have of engagement with this region. I really feel very strongly that it's time that we reconnected as people, not just at the political level, but at a people-to-people level, because they are lost cousins, really. I don't want to go deeper. We have people like Krishna Anand on this, who are historians, who will have a better idea. But this whole migration of the Aryans into India, this is such a strong connection historically with this region. I think we should take a far more proactive role than we are doing currently.
Sir, we will take 2 more questions. One is from Chandan Goswami. He teaches mass communication in Guwahati University. So naturally, he has just typed it. He said that I was following Google Map along your speech for better understanding. And his question is, what is the media situation and media impact in that area?
Media impact where?
in that area, that is the conflict area. He's asking about the media situations and media impact. I think he is asking about how what are the precautions the people have to take and how media is actually depicting the conflict.
Yeah. I think there is first thing, there's scope for a big independent media. My own experience in the media, I mean, one had this feeling even before that no media is really independent. Each one is reflecting a certain bias. It's if you have a CNN or a BBC, it is reflecting a certain point of view, and it's not entirely independent. So there's a slant always. And then we had this Al Jazeera coming up. Eventually, in the end, Al Jazeera very slick, technically very, very strong, but is really the voice of the Muslim Brotherhood in the end, in my own personal view. So there is a scope for an independent media to be there in these parts of the world. Second thing is that media itself has changed. So you no longer have, the normal way of reporting, that it is all becoming digital. So you got to be very familiar with the digital domain and the speed with which you have to report is much faster. The demand for multimedia has come in much more than earlier. So you have to be good at your videos and, also interactive. Because what happens now is when you release a news, immediately there are comments which are coming. Some of that the journalist himself or herself has to attend to. That's the one part of it. The changing need for independent media and the nature of media is changing. Second thing is, I think it's very important to keep yourself safe in conflict zones. And the first thing is not to be too adventurous, because as I said, there are rules of the game which are, you have to read there. You got to understand, like I was giving this example of this bombing between South Beirut and Tel Aviv. There's a pattern to it. So you got to read the situation that so long as this pattern remains, and if you are away from the exact impact areas of the conflict, you are safe. But the moment it changes, then is a time for you to take precautions. I can give a small example. I was in Benghazi, Libya, and there was one day the killing of a Al Jazeera cameraman, by forces we don't know. And for me, that was where the red light was flashing, that they have started killing journalists now. And that was a day I called my editor and I said that I think it is becoming too dangerous and journalists are being targeted. So I think I should be moving from Benghazi to Egypt. And of course, editors understand the situation. So I was told that, okay, now the time to exit. So I called the car which had taken me from Egyptian border, Egypt-Libya border. And we drove back the next morning at 5. So that's the time. So it's always a judgment call when it comes to your own safety and security. Never go into the big hotels. If you are especially print or if you're doing, a lone ranger kind of work, don't go in a conflict situation where the entire media is staying in a media hotel. I never did that. I stayed quietly away in a smaller hotel, less obtrusive, stay beneath the radar. You got to be a hero in print or in your reporting, not on the street. So that restraint is also very important when you are doing coverages in conflict zones, because if you get into trouble, it's very difficult to get help. So prevention is a much better thing than trying to be brave and trying to be a hero.
So there is one question about war crimes. It is from Trisha Duara Borua. She is asking, why is accountability for alleged war crimes so hard to achieve in Israel-Palestine conflict?
Well, the answer is that from the Israeli side, I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of power they have. The Jewish community, their linkages with the United States, for example. If you take newspapers like New York Times and all the big icons, they're owned by Jewish groups. You talk about Wall Street, the big JP Morgans and others, I mean, of business houses or financial institutions of that level, mostly Jewish. And then you have in the Senate and other decision-making bodies, you have these bodies called IPAC, for example. IPAC is, everyone has to succumb. If there's a US presidential election, you better get IPAC on your side. So this is, depends on which side you are. One way you can say that the Israelis have worked so hard on the US system that the tail wags the dog, it's that kind of a situation. And that is the reason, because the Jewish lobby is so strong, that what the questionnaire is asking, Trisha, if I got the name right, that that it's very difficult to make them accountable for human rights violations because they have friends who are very powerful in the Human Rights Council, in the United Nations, or even in Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch. So these are realities of power in a way, which sometimes they're dictating it. I don't think this is permanent, but right now we are passing through that phase when there is just too much of power on one side of the aisle.
There's a question from Abhijit Bhuya of our university. He is asking, sir, is Iran still allegedly supporting Hamas financially or in terms of weaponry in the present state of violence? And if so, are we giving Iran a long road?
No, there's no doubt about that Iran is supporting the Hamas. And also there's another group in Gaza, which is the Islamic Jihad. Initially, Iranian support went to Islamic Jihad more than Hamas. Hamas is actually a Sunni organization. But over the years, once the Hamas broke away from Bashar al-Assad in Syria, that's when the Iranians came in even bigger way. But the real channel for the Iranian influence is the Hezbollah of Lebanon. And Hezbollah in turn has very strong connections, developed very strong connections with Hamas. So you can see that Iran is really a regional power. In Yemen, you see again the Houthis armed by Iran. And you see the Hamas and the Hezbollah also by Iran. Now, there's a certain logic to that. And when I go to Iran, I understand that logic, that there was this attempt to throttle the 1979 revolution of Iran right from the beginning. I mean, there was the 8-year Iran-Iraq war, where the whole idea was that Saddam Hussein would destroy the revolution which took place in 79. So if you are an Iranian sympathizer, you would say that if you're going to destroy me, it's for me, I have to defend myself and increase my influence in the region. So, it depends on which side you are on. But I can see the logic coming from Iran, why they need to be so powerful. A short answer, yes, Iranians are very, very influential both with the Hamas, and not just with Hamas, but also with the Islamic Jihad via Hezbollah.
So there are a few other questions, but I think you have already answered them. Questions were from Sultan Asim Siddiqui, questions were from Anupam Gohai, and there are questions from one unknown, unidentified audience also, but you have already answered them. But finally, sir, 2 points. One is, do you look at this conflict as a conflict of religion? And number two, do you think that the two-state solution, two-nation solution, is that possible?
I think it's not religion. Religion is only the upper layer. It's land, essentially. It's your heritage, your land, and your identity.
Yes.
And once you take that away from you, then you will fight. I mean, it's human nature. So I don't see that as religion-driven. Second thing is that solution, yes, I can't see anything else but a two-state solution. Maybe we'll need to broaden it out. There are countries in the neighborhood, with Jordan and you have Egypt on the other side. Can we enlarge the land mass? But you see, there's one issue which is coming up. It is called the right to return, which is those Palestinians who have been displaced from their land and are in refugee camps. Even though another generation has come, they said, ultimately, that is our land. We have a right to return. Now, if you allow the right to return, there's a second problem which emerges. It is that Israel may no longer remain a Jewish state because the majority of the population may be non-Jewish. So how do you accommodate this right of return? Which means the basic character of the Zionist movement of creating Israel as a Zionist state or Israeli, that disappears. So therefore, if you have to accommodate this, you will need a two-state solution. But then if you have so many refugees coming back and flooding, this is a very small area, Gaza, West Bank. I mean, it's not a big landmass. And then you have the sea on the other side. Then how do you resolve it? And that's why I said that probably you'll have to broaden out territorially. Some uninhabited area in Jordan on one side or from Egyptian on the other side. We'll need to rethink this problem again. Unless, let's say if there are refugees, Palestinian refugees in Paris or some other place, they become French citizens. I mean, that I doubt, because the sentiment of your roots and of going back is very, very strong. And you may be abroad for your economic sustenance or for a good life for a while. But I think finally your roots call you back. And this has to be, it's a difficult, but two-state is the fundamental line. You need to elaborate probably on it and update it to current realities.
I think there is no more question.
I think I deserve the last question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please. Please.
Okay. So Atul, I just actually, it's not a very difficult question. It's just a small curiosity. As far as I understand, you have seen that thing. The whole Israeli population is a very heterogeneous kind of a population.
Yes.
The people from different baggages, cultural baggages, heritage, they come to Israel and they settle down. Some of the people who actually came along, some of our very good my friends, are the Russians.
Absolutely.
And they have a very different kind of temperament. There are people from Europe, as you say, more liberal kind of a thing, And there are also people from our own land here in Northeast Mizoram.
Yes.
Who are actually ancestor from. So there are all the heterogeneous population, with a different cultural background. They have different historical, political background. Finally, how it happens in Israel, there's a strong righteous force emerges. How come it's possible? It should be actually, because I normally tend to compare the situation with Assam. Assam is a multinational, multicultural, multi-religious, and a lot of tolerance here. So in that situation, how it happens in Israel, a little bit it confuses sometimes to me. It should have been very liberal kind of a state,
Sure.
Yeah.
Candy, what really happens is that when you are persecuted, the trauma of the Holocaust was a great unifying factor. But that is in the 40s. So you had because of the memories were so strong. So initially you went in and it was a fairly well united sentiment in terms of sentiment united. Then you have the other layer coming, which you're talking about, the 80s, when, Andropov was the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Soviet Union. And you have this huge flood of Russian Jews who migrated to Israel, who do not necessarily connect. And the memories of the Second World War are also fading a bit. And if a new generation comes, they won't have memories of that, not personal memories. They would have heard from their fathers or grandfather. So that's a problem. The third thing which came was, the rise of the right is also when you had this Jewish migration coming from Africa, from Ethiopia. And these were not the Ashkenazis, the rich Jews, or who had this liberal tradition. And this is where the right really rises, when Netanyahu takes advantage of these African migrants and brings them under the Likud party. So that's where, but now the pressures are building up. While your religion is the unifying factor, but there are now strong heterogeneity in Israel, and people are questioning it. So I'm not sure where Israel will go from internally, because there is also a possibility of exfiltration, people leaving Israel and going to New York or other places or Europe. And that can happen very well. So we are completely in flux right now. And we are also, the world has changed, a globalized world. You see opportunities. You don't want to stick to your Jewishness. If you see some opportunity coming, let's say in Bangalore in India, and if you're an IT specialist in Israel, and you're getting good money, you'll go. So those pressures are there, Candy. So we are going, this is not the end. This story is still in the middle somewhere. As they say, Shah Rukh Khan picture abhi baki hai mere dost. It's that situation.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Joyantap, we can close.
Yeah, there is no more questions. So I will ask Professor Joydeep Borua to offer the formal vote of thanks. And then we can conclude today's session. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. It's a wonderful, to listen to you as always. I mean, earlier also and today also, and also I'm very happy that very probing questions also were, thrown up by our participants, which actually made this whole session very lively and interactive. I take the privilege of offering formal vote of thanks to everyone. I begin with our Vice Chancellor, sir, for supporting all our efforts, including this one. And the moment we shared the idea, he readily agreed, and he was, become more enthusiastic than all of us having you here, and then getting this session done. So thank you, sir, for the support. I then, I would like to offer our thanks to Otula Aneja for readily agreeing to be with us this evening and then also share his thoughts and experiences and the way we imagined the whole idea and successfully he actually have done this exactly the what we have envisaged, and that is why we would like to offer great from heartiest thanks who supported all the events, and then I'd like to give them a big thank you to all. Our IT team has been excellent in supporting all the webinars that we have done in recent times. So to them also, I would like to give the thanks, formal vote of thanks, though they are very much part of us, and all the participants for being with us today. And thank you everyone for making this session extremely lively and extremely illuminating. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.